another, and I found, for any of you who pick one of these books up, fascinating. Obviously, I've known a bit about all over the years and whatever, but also it has lots of pictures. So let's go back in time a bit and talk before we get into the book you did. But tell me where you grew up and what are some of your earliest Jewish memories?
I'm a Detroiter. Born to a Ukrainian, he would have not appreciated that, Ukrainian born, but Lvov, Lemberg, Austro-Hungarian father, and Bethlehem, Lebanon, Pennsylvania mother. And thanks to Rabbi Adler, Sherry Tzedek in Detroit, I went to Hillel Day School to make sure that I had a Jewish identity. My parents weren't very religiously observant, but my father was kind of a Holocaust survivor, insofar as he got out, survived, which became a big part of his identity. He was also a composer of Jewish music. So music, Judaism and the arts was fundamental to my development. My father was mostly interested in music and secondarily in Jewish culture. I just changed the order a little bit, but pretty much stayed on the same two tracks.
Siblings?
My brother's here, Richard, and another brother, David, who's abroad, couldn't be here, but
Academic? What do they do?
Richard's an architect and a developer, and David is a lawyer, restaurateur, winemaker. I'm the only academic. My father was an academic. He taught at Wayne State for many years. Music, piano performance, and composition. But not an especially academic family. Very rabbinic family. My father was very proud of that, although I couldn't really read any of the works written by our ancestors. But that's another thing that I came in to take care of.
Where did you go to college?
Where did I go to college? I went to Michigan in Ann Arbor for undergrad, and I did actually a graduate work in history in the General History Department of Michigan, which was a great experience and very much impacted the way I do Jewish history. And ultimately, because I wanted to study with David Ruderman, who, by the way, was the doctoral advisor also of Anne. In other words, the two winners in this category are both students of David Ruderman. I think, if I'm allowed to give a round of applause to David Ruderman. I wanted to study with him. He had written a book called Kabbalah, Magic, and Science, which I read when I was a student in Michigan. And it seemed to me that he was doing the kind of work I was interested in, which was not Kabbalah studies the way they do it in Jerusalem, but a kind of an intersection of cultural history, history of science, and Kabbalah. And there wasn't really anyone else who was doing that at the time. And as I like to tell David, even now, he did it in 1988 and then went on to do other things, but I'm still doing Kabbalah, Magic, and Science in 2023 after all of these years.
When you talk about the way they do in Jerusalem, for those, how do they do in Jerusalem and how are you doing different?
So, I mean, just to say that, you know, if you were going to study philosophy and get into, you know, the most abstruse questions raised in the minutiae of the philosophical discussions and try and do the genealogies of these ideas in certain very exacting ways without much interest in the context, but with a tendency to compare things ahistorically, phenomenologically, and so forth. That's more of the Jerusalem approach. I always preferred for myself a cultural, historical, contextual approach to try and see phenomena in their living context. Also, going back to my first book, which was on spirit possession and Jewish culture in the early modern period. I was always interested in the way Kabbalah or magic operate in real life. Who are the people? What do their lives look like? How do they use the equipment in their bag of tricks? So writing about Ilanot was writing about physical artifacts. These were the tools used by Kabbalists going back to the 14th century, of which there are hundreds in existence, and about which not a single word had ever been written by a scholar of Kabbalah, because they were tools, they were physical artifacts, they were pictures, and not abstract treatments of ideas expressed exclusively in words. So when I first came across one of these scrolls, I asked the person who showed it to me, has anyone written anything about these? And they said, no, it's not a subject. And I felt like, some kind of gift from heaven had been delivered unto me. How is it possible that there's a genre of Jewish studies, a genre of cultural production for 600 years, hundreds of artifacts, and there isn't an entry in the Encyclopedia Judaica about them? There isn't an article to read about them. So I got to work.
Again, since most people in this room write, in terms of what you thought you were going to write about versus what it evolved into, did it change during the course? How long did this book take you?
It took a decade. Because there was no field, I had to establish the fundamentals, the chronology, the context, the raw materials, what we call in the field the manuscript families, just to know what's before, what's after, who is who, how does it all fit together? Is there a story that can be told about this? So I would say it took years before I could even think about being able to tell a story about this material. From the time I realized that I couldn't keep kicking the can down the road and had to start writing until the book was written, only maybe a couple of years passed. It was a couple of years of intensive work of putting together the outline and then just kind of filling it all in. As I wrote in the book, it's the first book, but it's only the first book, and it really sort of sets up the field. It's not overly theorized. It's a bit old-fashioned in terms of method. A lot of manuscripts and dates and not a lot of fancy names of French people, but it does the trick, I think. I hope. And 260 images that aren't decorative. The book is about the images. The images don't illustrate the book. So every image that's in there is an image that I talk about.
Talk about the research a bit now. You hit the jackpot with this Ilanot collection.
Yes.
And so there was a family started collecting
Wonderful
these.
man.
To talk about this man.
Wonderful man. And I dedicated the book to him. He's like a father figure to me. William Gross is his name. And he also deserves a round of applause. And I'm not the only scholar to benefit from his generosity of spirit. He's been collecting for 50 years, I'm going to say, if not more. He's winding down a little bit in his 80s, and in fact, the Ilanot collection was sold to the National Library just a few months ago for $1 million, actually, meaning that the book actually also contributed to the value of these artifacts on the market. But Bill, like he does and did over the course of his collecting career, put his entire collection at my disposal. A few years ago, I gave the layman workshop at Penn, and Bill gave me manuscripts to put in my carry-on bag to take with me to Penn so that I could show them the real manuscripts. And what kind of person does that? I was terrified, of course. Yeah, I mean, really in terms of the genealogy of the book, the first thought was to write a catalog of his collection. And then I thought, well, you can pretty much tell the story of the genre through his collection. Not quite. I thought, well, if I supplemented a little bit, and I realized I didn't have to write a catalog of his collection. I could use his collection to provide primary illustrations of important exemplars of the genre. But the book, in a way, tries to finesse the relationship between a catalog of one man's incredible collection and a history of the genre as a whole.
A number of these illustrations, which were spectacular, are at the Vatican.
That's true.
So how did the Vatican end up with so much of this material? And how many times did you go there?
I've been to
How easy was it to get in and get this research?
I mean, the Vatican has some incredible things, and I have to say, for the most part, the material that is of interest to me in the Vatican seems to have gotten there in primarily as a result of the interest of Christian Hebraists in Vatican circles. For example, Egidio de Viterbo, who was a famous cardinal in Rome and was an avid collector of Hebrew manuscripts. And when he passed, many of his manuscripts ended up there, among other places. So there are a lot of important manuscripts that are in Rome because church figures in very specific periods thought that it was important to collect Hebrew manuscripts. And it's also possible to say that thanks to the fact that they were collected by these Hebraists and stored away safely in the Vatican, they exist today for scholars to use. And the people in the Vatican who oversee these collections are also, I mean, they're Italians, so it's never entirely simple. It takes time. Sorry to all the Italians. We love you. We love you. But it takes a few emails. But wonderful people, and they've been very generous. And they actually asked me to write something in the first issue of that new Vatican Library Review. So I feel like I have like a friends and family discount at the Vatican now.
Last two questions. One,
Sure.
What you're teaching last year, this year, what are the name of your courses? What are you teaching?
Well, I teach one course for the international MA program in Jewish Studies called Magical Mystery Tour, which is, as you might imagine, magical mystery, which is a kind of idiosyncratic introduction to Jewish mysticism. And I also teach, our semester's been, our academic calendar now is a disaster, but I'm going to be teaching a course when it starts at the end of December, ostensibly, on Dibukim, on spirit possession, which I haven't done for many years, and one on visual Kabbalah, and another course also on Jewish magic in Hebrew for Israelis. I often teach a course on Safed Kabbalah in the 16th century. But yeah, these are them.
Lastly, many of us that don't have your depth of experience saw Kabbalah things usually circle things. Your book shows lots of tree-like issues, and I was thinking about the trees I mentioned earlier, especially in Hanukkah, just finishing with my 6-8-year-old, and the menorah and the tree. So just talk for 1 second about how that image came about.
It's a bit. I mean, it's a bit of a surprise, and I guess something of a spoiler to say, but the tree was like the premier infographic of the 12th and 13th centuries. Like today, if you look in the newspaper, you'll see pie graphics and Venn diagrams, and we have our infographics that we relate to as we can read them. We understand how they work and what they do. The arboreal figure that, like the Venn diagram, you know when you see a few circles intersecting, that it's trying to tell you how things are what overlaps and what doesn't, what's connected and what's different. The arboreal diagram was used for genealogy. The arboreal diagram was used in philosophical works. It's often called the Porphyrian tree because it was associated with a commentary on Aristotle's categories that gave a kind of developmental picture of higher and lower levels of being. But what the main point to say is that when Kabbalists wanted to find a way to visualize the powers of the divine, and this is something that I argue, at least in part, thanks to their self-understanding as men of science, they appropriated the most prestigious infographic of the science of their time and used it to visualize their own science of the invisible. They call it Chokhmat HaNistar, the science of the hidden. And although we associate the tree with a trunk and branches and leaves and fruit, the Kabbalistic images are almost always very austere, and they don't have that decorative approach. In fact, I think that they like the tree because, unlike the circles, which represent the actual structure of the cosmos, and that, if you think of the pre-Keplerian model of the cosmos as crystalline spheres that are nested one within another. So the circles actually threaten to corporealize our image of the divine, because it's saying that the structure of the divine continues the structure of the created world. But the tree had no such physical associations. When you see that your parents are above you on your family tree, it doesn't mean that your parents are sitting on top of you. It's not spatial, it's causal. So it's a kind of an ironic turnabout that I think that they went for the tree because it was free of spatial connotations and kept their theology as clear as possible of corporealization.
And if you want to know more about it, there's a session tomorrow. Your friend Joel Hecker, he's doing, what room is it? Joel, were you here?
Joel is here.
There's a session in the afternoon, I think, on Kabbalah. So
Tomorrow, yeah, and on Wednesday we have a session on Ilana as well.
Okay.
Tuesday.
Wonderful. Thank you. Next book, The Fortress in Brooklyn, was just fabulous.